and welcome back to the Moonlight Game Devs Podcast, the podcast where game developers share the story behind their latest game. Today I had a chat with Shane from Fat Gem Games. They're developing a 2D action platformer called Primal Light. We had a chat about some of the graphical influences for their game, which has a very unique art style, and some of the design choices that influenced them pivoting from being a Metroidvania to a more linear game. Hey Shane, welcome to the show.
Hey Mark, glad to be here.
You're creating a game called Primal Light. You're one piece of the two-man team. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, perhaps? Introduce yourself and talk a little bit about how you got into game development.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm Shane, last name Szynski. I'm one of the two co-founders of a very small indie studio, Fat Gem Games. Basically, it's me and my longtime friend, Jeff Nixon, who is the principal artist and sound person I work with. I'm located in Portland, Oregon. He's in Buffalo, New York. As for how I got into game development, basically always been interested in video games. Played them with my dad growing up. Played them with Jeff when we lived together. In college, I studied mathematics and philosophy. After college, I started tinkering around, learning how to program, mainly just to kill time. And once I started doing that, basically I had sort of an epiphany. I'm like, oh, hey, I can probably create games now. So I started tinkering around like in Python, trying to build little games. And one night when I was hanging out with Jeff at his apartment back in Buffalo, I showed him a little Zelda clone I was working on, just like a little like Game Boy Zelda clone. And it got him really excited because I know he's always been interested in game development, concept art and stuff like that. And basically we just started talking. I was like, hey, if you ever want to, contribute any assets, we can make a little project together. So basically that was the genesis of this project. This is both of our first foray into game development, kind of just flying by the seat of our pants, learning as we go. But yeah, that's the short of it. We've been working on the project for around 3 years. We started in August 2017, and we're getting ready to release the game in July of this year.
Cool, that's really exciting. How was your first, steps into game development? How did you get started learning it? Did you learn to code by making a game, or was it a longer process?
I got into coding wanting to do natural language processing, so just like parsing text, like identifying metaphors with programs and stuff like that. And then, like I said, I had sort of a little eureka moment where I'm like, why am I doing this? I could be doing something way more fun. I could be making games. So I started watching basically just YouTube tutorials on like how to make games. I started in a Python module called PiGame, which I'm pretty sure is like a defunct game making module that no one actually uses for like games that they release. But
I use that too, but I came to the same conclusion. I realized it's really not that in depth.
Yeah, we got pretty far making Primal Light in Pygame, and then I asked a question on like Game Development Stack Exchange, and someone in a comment was just like, "Why are you using this? Why aren't you using a real engine?" So I'm like, "Okay, I better do some homework on other engines." So then I started poking around in all the different engines. Yeah.
Talk us a little bit about that process. So you moved from Pygame, and I believe you ended up going for Godot as your engine. How was that process? What is the kind of thing that you were looking for that perhaps Pygame didn't quite deliver on, and did you ended up finding in that other engine?
I mean, it was a lot of things. Mainly, I was going a lot on what people were telling me that like I wouldn't be able to actually implement all my ideas in Pygame. I wouldn't it wouldn't be optimized enough to actually release to a wide audience. So really, and I knew I wanted to kind of do this seriously, potentially as a living. So I figured I had to learn like the major engines anyway. Mm-hmm. So I decided essentially to go with Godot for a couple of reasons. The first is that Godot uses its own proprietary scripting language called GDScript, but it's like very Pythonic. It's very similar to Python, so it's like super easy to learn. So that was one of the first reasons, just felt really at home in it. A couple other reasons we like it. The native measurement in Godot is the pixel. We're making a pixel art game, so it makes a lot of sense to use an engine that uses the pixel as like the fundamental unit of measurement. I don't think Unity does this, which is one of the reasons like a lot of pixel artists don't like working in Unity. You have to kind of do all the conversions from there.
Yeah, it uses meters, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you end up specifying all your distances as like fractions of a meter, and it's just like very like messy and non-intuitive.
Yeah.
And then also tinkered around in GameMaker. One of the reasons I don't like GameMaker, I prefer Godot, is like in Primal Light, we use a lot of coroutines, like where we start a method, then we wait for something to finish before we continue. There's no way to have that type of coroutine in GameMaker, so you end up having to do stuff with like Booleans. A variable is finished, and you wait for that to finish, then something else happens. So Godot makes it really easy to do kind of scripted events using coroutines. So those are some of the major reasons we decided to go with it. On top of that, the community is just like super nice, like relatively small community. Feels like you're part of kind of an up and coming project. I don't know. I just really like the community, like participating in the forum. So we decided to go with it.
I'm actually following the Godot subreddit, and there's always someone doing very interesting things. I think it's one of the subreddits which always has some people doing all kinds of complex experimental stuff, and it's very interesting. Godot community, I think, is full of people who are very enthusiastic about the open source aspect as well, and like going a little bit deeper into it.
Oh yeah, the fact that it's open source is another big plus. Just no licensing fees, can do any modifications you want. Super nice.
Have you guys actually done some kind of changes to the engine, or was that something that you guys have not looked into too much yet?
No, we haven't done any kind of extensions or modules or anything like that. The only real thing we've done is we're releasing our game on Steam, so we needed to essentially integrate the Steamworks SDK into the project. And we found a GitHub repository from a programmer by the name of Gramps, I believe. Let me quickly look up what this repo is called. It's called Godot Steam, and it's on GitHub. And basically, there's just a precompiled version of Godot, which has the Steamworks SDK already integrated. It makes it really easy to release your game on Steam, have the achievement integration, and stuff like that. So that's really the only way we've modified the engine. Haven't done any of the real modifications of the engine yet, primarily because that's too hardcore for me right now. It's something I want to look into after we release this project.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think the step from, Godot is programmed in like C++, at least on the engine level, is quite a big step from Python or the scripting language, I assume there. So what are some of your favorite features of Godot? Do you like the user interface, or is there anything else that's kind of makes it special and great for the type of game that you're making?
It's very easy to prototype in. The basic ontology uses like a node ontology, which is very similar to like Unity's object ontology, but you have nodes, you add child nodes, super intuitive. Every node can have only one script, so you end up putting all of your code for that node in a single script, which is really conducive to like, one object, one function kind of principle. So that's really nice. I like that there is an in-editor script editor. So like I think in Unity, you have to open up like an actual IDE to modify your scripts, but in Godot, you have it sort of embedded right there. The pixel measurement, like I said, really nice. Love the interface, the customization of the interface, dragging widgets all around. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. So we touched on a few things there, but we haven't really talked too much about what your game is actually about. I think the listeners, maybe also watching the gameplay on YouTube, will get a sense for it already, but I think to the people listening with just audio, I think maybe you, from the developer perspective, can give maybe a little bit of an overview of how you would describe the game.
Yeah, sure. So just to mention the game, the game is called Primal Light. It is a 2D linear action platformer in a roughly 16-bit style. Like not strictly 16-bit. We use a resolution much larger than like the Genesis or the Super Nintendo, but very roughly 16-bit. In the game, you play as a blue humanoid creature named Krog. He's essentially like a blue cyclops. He wears a red loincloth. Essentially, the story, very simply, it follows him on a quest to confront an ancient god who has cursed his tribe. And he's essentially trying to confront this god and lift the curse. Relatively simple story. We wanted a simple, direct story to fit the simple, direct nature of the game. I personally was inspired by a lot of the old Amiga games like Shadow of the Beast, games that just kind of plop you down in a bizarre and interesting world and let you run through it. And it's just a very evocative world, and you can sort of draw the story yourself and draw conclusions from the interestingness of the world. Yeah, as far as like unique selling points for the game, there's a couple that I think that make the game stand out. I think I can say this since I'm not the actual pixel artist. My partner Jeff is, but the pixel art is really good in my opinion. I really like it. I think it's very unique. It's not the standard 8-bit stuff you see from a lot of smaller indie studios. Really lucky to work with such a good artist like him. The world of the game is very unique. We use a setting that's like a lot of games now are using the sort of dark fantasy setting or dystopian sci-fi. And we actually started with that in mind. We wanted to do kind of a dark fantasy, Dark Souls-y, blasphemous kind of world. But we eventually decided to shift away from that just because we wanted something a little bit more unique. A lot of our favorite games have interesting settings like this rather than the standard setting fare. And then finally, like a lot of people look at the game and they think from the trailer or the screenshots that it's a Metroidvania, but actually it is just a linear action platformer. So the game is principally linear. There's 10 levels. Each level has a boss. So there's 10 bosses in the game. we did start intending to make a Metroidvania, but because this was our first project, we realized that a Metroidvania was just way more than we could achieve. It was just too ambitious for our first project. And when we shifted to like a linear paradigm, stuff really started to feel better. It became easier to develop, and it just felt refreshing actually to play a linear game, especially in the sea of recent Metroidvanias that we have. Don't get me wrong, I love Metroidvania. I think it's one of the best genres out there, but it's not good for a first project.
I think there's many great things you talked about there that I definitely want to touch upon. But I think one of the first things you mentioned was kind of the setting of your game. So I want to talk a little bit about the world building, because I looked at the game as well. And one of the interesting things I found was it's very hard to pinpoint, I guess, the theme or what you guys were going there for. So where did you draw the inspiration for the world? What did you kind of decide would fit and what wouldn't fit?
Yeah, so like I said, when we started, we assumed the game would be kind of dark fantasy, knights and stuff. Jeff was learning how to do pixel art for this project. Like, he didn't have any pixel art experience before this. So at the beginning, he was just doing a bunch of kind of little pixel arts of knights using 4 color palettes and stuff like that. And we didn't really know what direction the game was going to take, except that we knew we wanted it to be kind of action-based with a sword slash. And then one day, after a bunch of trial and error and iteration, Jeff just threw together this kind of unique main character, basically a Cyclops in a loincloth. And when I saw that, I'm like, whoa, this is pretty unique, And we ended up taking that as an opportunity to depart from kind of the medieval Dark Souls-y vibe that we started with and go with something slightly less treaded territory. And I think the world that we ended up building is like pretty reminiscent of the worlds of a lot of Amiga games, like Shadow of the Beast, Lionheart, Ghost Battle. Worlds that are just kind of like surreal and unique, kind of tribal, kind of alien, barbarian meets caveman meets alien. So that's kind of the aesthetic we ended up with. Something between caveman, barbarian, tribal with a hint of alien. Once we landed on that, we're like, yes, this is the theme we want. And then every time Jeff would make an asset, we'd ask ourselves, does this fit in with that world? If not, how can we modify it to fit into this world? Very
interesting. So how did Jeff, I don't know if you were familiar with this, but how did he work himself into this process of developing his pixel art skills? Was he sort of someone with an art background? He already knew how to draw? Or was he someone basically learning how to do this stuff from scratch? Because I agree, it's very impressive pixel art. It's very technical and really fits well to the theme, I think, that you were going for.
Yeah, so Jeff and I, we both went to high school together in Buffalo, New York, and we went to an art school called Buffalo Academy for Visual and Performing Arts. It was basically a high school that let you basically pick a major, learn how to apply skills in that major. And we both studied art there, where we'd have, one art class per year. So yeah, we both had a background in art. We went to college together, and then we lived together for 5 years. And all that time, Jeff was dabbling in art, playing music, doing concept art, but he never actually dabbled in pixel art. It was sort of high resolution stuff. So the short answer is yes, he had an art background, but he went through kind of a painful process of learning pixel art, and it wasn't easy, mainly just by watching YouTube videos, looking at games, studying what other pixel artists do. He developed a pretty good intuition for it, and now he can churn out assets pretty quickly.
Cool. So you guys were touching earlier on how you thought that initially you would want to make a Metroidvania, because I agree it's kind of in trend right now to make one with all these successful games that are heavily inspired. What was the point where you guys decided to pivot and decided, this is probably not for us as our first project? Was there a certain point where you were trying to create a level with that style where you have to backtrack, or was it something else?
I want to say it was like halfway through this 3-year development process that we decided to shift gears. I don't really know what the catalyst was or why we decided to change. Just that whenever we would meet to talk about it, we would have so many open questions related to the Metroidvania aspect of it that we couldn't answer. And then I looked at a lot of the games that I was playing and that I liked, like I had just discovered Joy Masher as a company, so I was playing Odalis and Onikin, and Blazing Chrome was on the horizon, and I knew that all of them were more kind of linear games, and I just thought it would be refreshing if we also shifted to that kind of linear paradigm.
Yeah, makes sense. So we talked a little bit about the difficulty in your game. I think when I played it, a lot of that came from just the player needing to be really precise with their actions, just having that really meticulous timing. They need to get a lot of the platforming sections perfectly right or else they're going to fall in lava or get hit by something. How did you guys come up with that design, and how do you go approaching these kind of hardcore platforming levels?
When we started, we weren't the best level designers, and we would make a level and we would think that it was too easy. You could just jump over all the enemies, or there wasn't much interesting platforming. So basically what we ended up doing is like, we would just keep iterating on it. I would throw together a little level chunk. I would give the chunk to Jeff, and he would play through it, and he'd be like, oh, this jump feels good, but this other one doesn't. Or like, so really just trial and error and iteration, and like starting with a lot of really bad, crummy like level chunks. And eventually, as you do this more and more, you start to build an intuition. Like, we learned that it feels more fun in our game to jump up a 32 pixel high platform than a 64 pixel high platform. So when in doubt, go with a 32 pixel high platform. Similarly for like jumping over gaps. 1.5 tiles tends to be more fun than jumping over 2 tiles or 1 tile. So when in doubt, you should always have the player jump over, 1.5 tiles. And there's kind of similar patterns you realize with respect to dashing and sliding and double jumping. And once you start to build an intuition for all this stuff, level design becomes much less frustrating and much more enjoyable, because you sort of know the vocabulary you're working with. You're no longer paralyzed by choice. It goes back to like working in restrictions. That's one of the reasons working in pixel art is so nice. And it's kind of the same with level design. Once you know the principles that make a good level, that make a level feel good, you work within that restricted set, and it becomes easier and more enjoyable. But I got to tell you, we were not very good at level design at first. I think we've built our intuition, and the game is fun now.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's fun. But I still think that it's very hard. Did you guys have some kind of idea on how you're going to scale the difficulty? So is there maybe like a hard or easy mode or something like that as well?
Yeah, so there are three difficulty modes. There is an easy, normal, and a hard mode. Basically, the game is a little bit unusual for a modern game in that there is a lives system. So you start with a finite number of lives, and then if you're on a certain stage and you run out of lives, you have to restart the stage and you get all of your lives back. So there's kind of a lives continue system like you see in a lot of older games. But mainly the difficulties, they differ with respect to how many lives you have by default. So on easy mode, you start with 9 lives. On normal mode, you start with 7. On hard mode, you start with, I think, 3 or 5. So the number of lives is the principal difference, but in addition to that, on hard mode, bosses have slightly more HP, not like considerably more. It's not like we just bump up the HP, but like 5 to 10% more HP, and they're slightly more aggressive, meaning the times between their attacks are slightly shorter, so that they give the impression of being more aggressive. But those are the principal.
So AI behavior, resources, aka like the health of the player, and some of the other stats for the enemies. Is that correct?
Yeah, we also toyed with the idea of like modifying enemy placement on hard mode, but it was just too ambitious and it would change the experience too much. On hard mode, if you have an extra skeleton here, or instead of walking right at first, the skeleton walks left, which makes it jump slightly harder. We essentially decided to avoid doing that because it just complicated things too much. It made the experience too different on hard mode.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about combat, which is also a pretty important thing in your game. You guys have some elements from, I believe they're modern inspired. So you guys have like dodge roll and sort of this healing that's pretty popular these days, where the character has to take some time out to heal with like a flask or something. But then there's also these kind of old school feeling kind of mechanics where, you don't have a lot of knockback. You have to move away and jump around from the enemies. How did you guys come up and get the combat right? Were you guys going for more of an arcade style or something more modern, or a balance between?
Well, it's a good question. When we started, we were definitely going for something modern. So when we started, we were like heavily inspired from Dark Souls. It's one of my and Jeff's favorite series. The roll was initially intended to be Dark Souls like dodge roll, where you had iframes and you could roll through enemies' attacks, and all of the attacks were very slow and telegraphed so that you could roll through them. But ultimately, we took out the iframes because it ended up making the game too easy. You could just roll through enemies. We originally didn't have any damage when you collided with enemies. Only if they actually attacked you would you get hurt. But again, the game just felt too easy. You could roll through every enemy. So we took out that aspect of it. And now the roll, it functions as a speed boost. So you can use it to speed up your traversal. And you can also use it to break breakable objects. So it still functions as a defensive move in that you can roll away from enemy attacks faster, but you can't roll through enemy attacks. the on-demand healing, like the delayed healing, that remains. That was inspired by Dark Souls and a lot of the modern games that do stuff like that. It's not in many retro games, but it is present in games like Hollow Knight, Blasphemous, Death's Gambit, Dead Cells, all of the games that were inspiring to us when we started this project. And just like, it's a really nice mechanic, the delayed healing, because it's a very easy way to introduce some risk reward into the game, makes combat a little bit more exciting. Yeah, it just felt good.
Yeah, I think it definitely makes decisions a lot more, adds a lot of decisions to the combat, which are, makes it a little bit more interesting as well, for sure.
Yeah. But to your point, we did start with wanting a more robust combat system. But when we shifted from that Metroidvania, at that point when we shifted to a more linear game, we were like, we need to make the game feel more arcadey. So that's when we started really fine-tuning stuff. The lack of knockback on enemies is actually something we've heard complaints about from playtesters. But we've also heard playtesters tell us that they like the feeling of the lack of knockback. Ultimately, there were a few reasons we decided not to have knockback on ground enemies. We actually do have knockback on flying enemies, but not on any of the ground enemies. But the main reasons are, first of all, when we had knockback on the ground enemies, it made the game feel too easy. It was just very easy to run up to a skeleton and hit them out of range so they couldn't attack you and just keep doing that. So it partly made the game too easy. Second, it didn't look good without using a unique knockback animation for each enemy. Like, we tried it with with each enemy's idle animation, where you hit them, they would go to their idle animation and just kind of fly backwards a few pixels, but it didn't look good. So we realized that if we wanted, good looking and good feeling knockback, we'd have to do an extra animation for each enemy, which seemed daunting to us, and we didn't have the bandwidth for it. And then finally, midway through this project, I played Hollow Knight for the first time, and I really love the simplicity of that game's combat. I think that's a great game of how to do a lot with a little. Like, there's no slopes in that game. There's no moving platforms. The combat is relatively simple. And although there is knockback in that game, if I remember correctly, there's not too much of it. And the core combat loop is kind of like, you jump in, you attack, you potentially attack twice if you want to risk a little bit, and then you jump out, and then you jump back in. So I was really inspired by that kind of simple combat loop of jump in, jump out. So we decided to try to do something a little bit similar.
Yeah, I think it works. It gives the game a pretty unique feel because it's quite uncommon to have that knockback for sure. You guys mentioned that, obviously the art style was inspired by the Amiga. Did you guys have any other sort of constraints, and did that decision impact anything else in the development process?
No, when we started, we were very inspired by modern pixel art games. So I know Jeff was looking at a lot of stuff that was coming out. Blasphemous was slated to come out, a year from when we started. Death's Gambit was in progress. I think Dead Cells had just came out or was coming out. We started looking at those games, really loved the juicy, higher resolution styles of those games. So that was a heavy artistic inspiration at first. And then when we landed on the world design, the kind of tribal, Jurassic kind of design, that's when we started looking at games like Shadow of the Beast, Oddworld, Abe's Odyssey, huge inspiration to both Jeff and I in terms of games we liked growing up and aesthetics we liked. And our character kind of looks like a buff Abe from Oddworld. So we started to look to those types of weirder games, and even games like Donkey Kong Country, Earthworm Jim, Demon's Crest on Super Nintendo. Those are some of the artistic inspirations of the game.
Yeah, I find it interesting how you guys are kind of bouncing back between very old games and very, very recent trends as well.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things I noticed about your game as well is you guys have really an emphasis on making objects in the game feel lively. So you guys have a lot of bounce, I guess, coins bounce around. There's some very satisfying sounds there. How did you guys sort of get that feeling right of giving it that retro, satisfying aesthetic, getting some weight to the player's actions and making everything feel really alive?
Yeah, so we watched a ton of game dev talks when we started this project, and many of the game dev talks that we watched, they mentioned the notion of juice or game satisfaction. Those one or two talks from the co-founder of Flambeer on the subject of juicing up your game, they're kind of a must-watch for any aspiring game developer. Yeah, aside from watching talks like that, we landed on the effects basically just by studying our favorite games. I remember when I was playing Hollow Knight with my girlfriend during the development project, I was kind of annoying her by constantly stopping to check this or that aspect of the screen shake. For example, every time I played every time I play a game, I ask myself, like, is the shape pure randomness or is it more vertical than horizontal? If it is a vertical screen shake, does it start by moving up or down? So once you start analyzing effects like that, you end up opening a can of worms, and you just kind of, every time you play a game, you stop to study those types of effects. For hit effects, like when an enemy is damaged, in Primal Light, the basic enemies just flash white for a couple frames. But we found pretty recently, actually, that this doesn't look good on bosses given their size. Like, it doesn't look good if you have a screen-sized boss flash entirely white. So we decided to just use quick flashes of brightness for the bosses when they're damaged. But once you make that decision, you have to decide, like, how many times is the boss going to flash? How many frames is each flash going to last? How many frames are you going to have between the flashes? And to figure those questions out, I remember watching a ton of YouTube clips I remember watching Shinobi, some of the 16-bit Contra games, Demon's Crest, and a bunch of others, and just filling my notebook with, like, what types of effects they were using, how many frames they lasted. On YouTube, you have the option of progressing frame by frame, so you can actually count the frames. So just doing stuff like that. As for the explosions, I know Jeff was very inspired by the explosions of Contra and Metal Slug. Like, Metal Slug has some of the juiciest, like, nicest explosions in any video game.
Yeah, and the sounds of the explosions are also very iconic. And I think you guys were probably inspired by that a little bit as well. Speaking of sounds, so I think one of the things I noticed is that the sounds are just very, very, I guess crisp is the right word. They sound just satisfying. And I was wondering, how did you guys approach that? Were the sounds synthesized, or did you guys bit crush them, or how did you guys approach that?
No, we didn't do any bit crushing. For music, I know Jeff uses Fruity Loops Studio and a ton of Virtual Studio Technology instruments, and then he plays a little bit of real guitar just to add flavor into the music. But for the sound effects, because we are, like, this is our first project, we didn't purchase any assets or anything like that. We essentially just leveraged open source assets that we found online. So we would go to freesounds.com or freesounds.org. We would find some sounds that we would like, and then Jeff would synthesize them and mix them together into the sounds of the game. A lot of trial and error on that. Like, some of the sounds that gave us the most difficulty were enemies being hit, then the sound of coins. Like, because you hear those a lot, you want to make sure that those sounds are really good. So we did a ton of trial and error on those. But yeah, essentially they're all open source assets that we found online, and we're actually kind of proud that we did it all using open source assets.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would have guessed that that you guys actually had, I guess like a professional sound session or paid for some sounds or something, because the sound is very good. So,
thank you.
No problem. You mentioned earlier that you do want to make game development your main business, I guess. So, given that it's not right now, how are you guys sort of organizing the whole thing? And you guys are also located quite far apart. So, are you guys using, Slack or something to organize your projects and making sure you're staying motivated, or?
No, I mean, we work in the project in whatever scraps of free time we can find. So typically, Jeff and I will work 1 to 2 hours each night of the week. Then on Saturday and Sunday, we might put in 8 to 12 hours on the project. And on Saturday and Sunday, we usually have sessions together where we use Discord to communicate. So we just DM each other in Discord. We screen share that we can see what each other's working on and give feedback. And then as for actually sharing the project, we use GitHub Desktop. So whenever one of us makes a major change to the project, we push the change via GitHub. The other pulls it, and that way we're both always working on the most current version of the project. But yeah, essentially those are our principal tools: Discord and then GitHub.
And I assume Godot as well. So, or whatever art software. I guess it's probably a pretty long list. But that said, does Godot actually work well with GitHub? I mean, how does that work? I know in Unity there's like meta files and stuff you need to push to the repository, but how does it work in Godot?
It sounds super easy. You can make a repo on GitHub with all of your Godot repository, and then you can use GitHub Desktop just to push changes to it directly. There's no bells or whistles or anything you need to set up. It's super simple, much more simple than I thought it was going to be.
Oh, cool. That's really interesting to know. I think that Godot seems like a really promising project. Not sure if it'll ever... Well, if it will or when it will compete with sort of the big engines with sort of larger studios, but I think it's got a lot of signs there, and I think you guys, for example, releasing a commercial game with it is definitely a sign for that as well. did you guys have some kind of marketing that you guys are doing right now for the game to raise some awareness for it, aside from speaking on podcasts?
We try to post regularly on Twitter and Reddit, although we've been neglecting that a little bit as we push to finish the game. I've done a few game development meetups and showcases here in Portland. We've dabbled in devlogs. We hope to do more in the future on future projects, but releasing some of those. And then finally, we've reached out to various websites that write articles on games and game releases and stuff like that. Basically, just using their contact us forums online. But yeah, those are all the principal ways we're doing outreach.
Can you talk a little bit about those meetups? Were they sort of self-hosted, or did you try and find some meetups in your area and speak on them?
Here in Portland, Oregon, there's something called the Portland Indie Gaming Squad, or PIG Squad, and they host regular meetups where you basically just, you go to a bar with your computer and you work on your project, and then other people can stand around watching you work on the project, or, you can demo it for them. Throughout the year, they'll host bigger showcases that are kind of more formal, where they set up a table and you can bring your monitor and set up your project and, demo it for people.
Oh, that sounds like a great networking opportunity for sure. I personally really like going to meetups as well for these sort of things, to just have a chat with some people who are also, just doing cool things, building stuff and exchanging ideas. So I want to start maybe wrapping things up here. I think I've learned a lot from chatting with you. So I guess, what are some of your biggest lessons learned from making this project, which is pretty impressive as well for your first big project?
Well, I think one of the principal things I learned is that it's okay to throw away work, even a lot of work. I know that this was especially hard for Jeff, because he spent hours and hours on an asset, and then we ended up not using it in the game. And I want to say something like 40 to 50% of all of the stuff that we prototyped, 40 to 50% of all the stuff that we implemented, we ended up cutting from the game. There were tons of mechanics that we ended up cutting, like wall sliding, wall grabbing, charge attacks, 3-hit combos, stamina system, all of this stuff. Probably 10 different enemies we worked on, we had assets for, and we ended up not liking them, so we didn't use them. So in general, it's okay to throw stuff away. Sometimes when I was doing development, I was reminded of that one quote about sculpting, like, the sculpture is already there within the marble. You just have to carve away all of the junk around it. And that's kind of how I approached a lot of this project. We would just add stuff, add feature after feature, and then carve away the stuff that wasn't working until we had a more minimalist focused project. So that principle can actually be kind of a good game development principle if you approach it the right way. And then if there was anything I had to change, I would have possibly proposed that we do like a run and gun as our first project, because I feel like run and guns are in general easier to do as first projects. They're easier to make satisfying. Like dealing with all the intricacies of melee combat is not as easy as just shooting a projectile. No offense to anyone making a run and gun. I really want to make one, but I might have chose that as my first project.
Yeah, that's makes sense for sure. Did you guys end up developing a process or something like that helped you guys basically determine what you wanted to end up scrapping and speed up that process faster, or?
We just learned it over time. I found that I was incorporating these kind of cycles into my own game development, where like there'd be a week where I just kept adding all of this stuff, and then the next week or 2 weeks later, I would just go through the repo and say like, oh, I had this special kind of like projectile that we haven't used anywhere. I'm just going to get rid of that. Or like this enemy, we haven't used this in any levels yet. Is this something we really want to keep? We're not that happy with the movement, so let's just take it out. And basically, I was just not shy or not. I wasn't too cautious about just gutting stuff from the project when I realized we weren't using it. And I think that led to us including just the stuff that we really liked.
I think it's very good and also pretty difficult to not stay too attached to things that are in the game or things you wanted to add and so on. But I think that cutting things out can definitely raise the quality overall. So, Shane, thanks for coming onto the show. Yeah, and good luck with the release of your game.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider leaving a review and subscribing on whatever platform you're listening to. For more game development content, head down to moonlightgamedevs.com. I hope you have a great week and join me for the next episode.